I'm Dr. John Kruse, and today I'm going to be talking about breathing exercise for ADHD. Despite the logic and plausibility and a handful of very sketchily described anecdotal reports, not even sort of a formal write-up, but just people saying, yeah, I've done it and it works to help with ADHD symptoms, there's actually, don't hold your breath for this, no real research looking at breathing exercise in ADHD. So there's a subset of less than 10 studies that I could find looking at meditation approaches for ADHD, and many of the meditation approaches involve some amount of breath work or attention to the breath, but none of those separated out the breath work separately from the meditation itself. So it was unclear when they showed some benefits for people with ADHD, whether it was due to breathing, due to the meditation. The study that came out just a few weeks ago got a fair amount of attention, showing that one particular form of breathing exercise called cyclic sighing showed improvements in mood and decreases in anxiety through just a month of 5 minutes a day cyclic sighing. Cultures for millennium have been incorporating breathing approaches as part of meditation and relaxation and regeneration. I mean, more particularly Buddhist and yoga practices from Asia and from many of our Western cultures. Some would argue that saying the rosary or some of our other chants are indirectly a form of breath training or breathing exercise. Clearly in the last few years, and I would think accelerated by COVID, where we were focused on what was coming in our mouth, there's been more attention to the importance of breathwork and breathing, and at least a handful of books that were New York Times bestsellers were focused exclusively on breathing. Things like Wim Hof and his breathing and cold exposure techniques have certainly increased widely in popularity. But most of the theorizing, most of the suspicion of how breathing might work is focused on the autonomic nervous system. So autonomic means that usually we don't have to pay any attention to it. It's just doing its thing, regulating aspects of our body without conscious intervention. That doesn't mean we can't consciously intervene and have an impact on it. And breath work is one of the most potent ways to effectively intervene with the autonomic nervous system. Some people divide it further, but for our purposes, we'll consider two parts: the sympathetic nervous system and the parasympathetic nervous system. The sympathetic nervous system is essentially the flight or fight response. So it's an activating, heart rate goes up, breathing goes up, blood gets shunted away from digestion and other parts of the body. It's to take care of yourself in emergency. Parasympathetic nervous system is working in opposition to that. That doesn't mean it's doing exactly the opposite, but both of these are regulating your body. Parasympathetic tone is probably more important for what's ongoing, chronically helping your body be in a homeostatic state relative to the environment. So some people have called the parasympathetic nervous system the rest and digest system. So it's calming you down and allowing blood flow into your digestive system. Others call it the feed and breathe system. So again, it's focused on nutrition and part of the sexual response cycle, part of the erectile system. Men and women is dependent on an intact parasympathetic nervous system. So there is a small amount of evidence that people with ADHD consistently are showing either inadequate or lower parasympathetic nervous system tone, or are failing to engage the parasympathetic nervous system when it's time to shut off the sympathetic nervous system. And consequently, the imbalance between the systems is favoring, again, not complete consistency, small number of studies, but there is moderately consistent amount of data showing many people with ADHD have overactive sympathetic compared to parasympathetic nervous systems. It seems to be correlated with, and it makes sense that greater impulsivity, greater hyperactivity, greater emotional volatility or reactivity are associated with sympathetic overdrive. And if you can do something to enhance parasympathetic control, you may help all of those symptoms. Probably a dozen top studies on meditation approaches for ADHD. All of them are using different meditation strategies, different lengths of time practicing it, with or without breath work involved. Usually for meditation, most of the breath work is passively observing breath and focusing on breath as a way to be in the moment or present rather than to actively engage and alter breathing. There is some evidence that meditation states with the breathing and some even less extensive work with just looking at breathing states can increase that parasympathetic tone by looking at not heart rate, but heart rate variability. So whether your heart's beating at 45 beats a minute or 80 beats a minute or somewhere in between, the space timing between each individual heartbeat isn't exactly precisely like a metronome. There's variability. One is due to the breathing cycle itself, and that's called respiratory sinus arrhythmia. So when you are inhaling, heart rate actually is a little faster. When you're exhaling, breathing out, heart rate slows down a little bit. That's mostly oxygenation factors in the different parts of your breathing cycle, but changes in intrathoracic pressure, which affect blood flow coming in and out, particularly venous blood flow. You'd think, I don't want a lot of variability. But actually you do. That shows your body can adjust well beat to beat, that it's versatile, that it's resilient. So low heart rate variability, being more like a metronome, in a number of different studies has been associated with poorer health and poorer long-term health outcomes. And again, there's some evidence that people with ADHD, again, not complete consistency in studies, but have lower heart rate variability, sign of low parasympathetic drive. There's a whole broad range of different breathing practices that are considered helpful. Again, some associated specifically with schools, so there are different approaches to meditation. Very little comparison head-to-head of, is it that breath work at all is helpful, or are there specific approaches that may be helpful either for relaxation or for focus or attention? Coherent breathing, particularly associated with Richard Brown at Columbia. The claim is that slowing down your inhale and exhalation and getting to about 5 breaths a minute. And in medical school, we are taught that most people are breathing close to 10 to 12 times a minute. So slowing everything down helps synchronize heart, lungs, and brain wave patterns. And again, they have some data, mostly in healthy people, that can increase aspects of focus and decrease aspects of anxiety. Data for help with ADHD is purely anecdotal. Often these terms overlap and aren't precise, but diaphragmatic breathing is focusing on using your diaphragm, or abdominal breathing. So it's paying attention, is your abdomen going in or out, and basically is slowing both inhalation and exhalation to get a slower overall respiratory rate. There's also what's called box breathing, 3, 4, or longer seconds to inhale, hold your breath, exhale, hold your breath, inhale. So it's the 4 sides of a box. That's a particularly popular one in some military training. A few studies looking at it can help dampen down anxiety when you've been startled or you're in a sympathetic nervous system overdrive state. And it's also thought particularly to help increase the sense of competency or in control over your body. A popular one is called 4-7-8 breathing. This is more closely associated with Herb Benson at Harvard and the relaxation response. Probably almost half a century ago, he was one of the forerunners of relaxation and meditation and the health benefits thereof. And the 4-7-8 is referring to an inhalation of 4 seconds, holding it for 7 seconds, and then breathing out for 8 seconds. So the exhalation is much longer than the inhalation. And again, during exhalation, heart rate decreases. So that may be more calming, more soothing. Cyclic sighing, the instructions are to inhale, not super rapidly, but inhale, sort of full breath, and then top it off with another shorter inhalation through the nose. There is research, one study that I've seen showing that nose breathing can help with synchronization or brainwave activity in particularly limbic structures of the brain. The amygdala and the hippocampus were not affected by the same breathing patterns done through the mouth, and there's well-documented neural pathways why that might make sense. Their recommendation in this study was through the mouth, but through the mouth and nose, or even just through the nose, was okay as well. Also, some forms of breathing that emphasize the inhalation step, one of them called hyperventilation and retention approaches. A study that just got published was conducted at Stanford University by David Spiegel, been working for decades in the field of mind-brain control, and particularly looking at attitudes and relaxation that cancer, particularly women with breast cancer, had, and how that affected long-term survival or not. One of the other co-authors was Andrew Huberman, who has an immensely popular blog about different aspects of how the brain works and overlapping into mental health. Several other collaborators at Stanford. So their well-designed study, 3 different breathing groups and 1 meditation group, 108 individuals who were eventually enrolled in this study. So it's not a huge study, but it's not tiny either. The Cyclic Sighing group was supposed to do 5 minutes of breathing. So I'll actually act it out. So it's they did a box breathing group. Again, same amount of time on inhalation, pause, exhalation, pause, inhalation for 5 minutes, and a hyperventilation and retention group. Subjects in the breathing groups, only about 70% of the days actually did their breathing 5 minutes of exercise. But again, even with that, there were measurable improvements by the end of the study. My message there is, if you skip a day, don't despair. That doesn't mean it's useless or you're falling off track. You have to start from zero. They also measured mood with a daily scale. So this was a remotely done study. They provided instructions online with videos. Subjects reported the instructions were clear. They were able to follow it well. They did not monitor the breathing exercise themselves, but they could look at heart rate variability, again, which is a marker for parasympathetic state, respiratory rate, and whether there are changes in sleep. And there's no neutral waiting list control. All of them showed improvement in more positive mood, less negative mood, less anxiety. But the Cyclic Sighing group clearly was the best, particularly on improving positive mood. So it outperformed the meditation group. There was also a statistically significant slowing down of respiration rate, and extent to which respiration was slowed correlated well with in the Cyclic Sighing group, who showed improvements in mood. Interestingly, they did not see changes other than respiratory rate. Heart rate didn't seem to be altered. Heart rate variability didn't seem to be altered, which is disappointing if you're proposing that parasympathetic tone is the mechanism by which this is going on. But again, it's a small study, it's a short period of time. And sleep changes were not apparent in any of the groups. It's rational to believe that this may help with ADD symptoms, including focus and attention and emotional volatility. But don't hold your breath for it, because I don't know of any active studies that are about to do it. But maybe Siegel and Huberman et al. Study will prompt more extensive research in other areas for the impact of breathing. Again, the nice things are you can do it at home, you can do it yourself. You don't need supervision. Recommendation or warning, you should be seated in a comfortable place or laying down in a comfortable place. Probably also works well. Do not do this while you're driving. So stay healthy, stay happy,